For Caleb, the honeyed scent of melting beeswax was the smell of poverty. He grew up watching his father, a master candlemaker, give away half his stock to anyone who shivered in the mountain winds.
"A candle loses nothing by lighting another," his father would say. But Caleb only saw their threadbare coats and empty bowls. He saw a man burning his own life to warm strangers. When the old man died, Caleb buried him and buried the old ways with him. He took over the vats, perfected the craft, and slammed the door on charity. He tripled prices. He hoarded the profits. The years blurred into a fast, frantic frenzy of clinking coins and expanding ledgers. Caleb built a grand stone house, transforming himself into a solitary figure draped in fine wool, convinced his wealth was an impenetrable armor against a harsh and taking world. Then came the Great White. It descended not as a winter storm, but as a predator. A massive blizzard swallowed the village, dropping temperatures until the sap froze in the trees, cracking the trunks like musket fire. Ice severed the fragile power lines. In a heartbeat, the entire valley was plunged into a suffocating, terrifying blackness.
Inside his fortress, Caleb was untouched. Thousands of premium beeswax candles filled his cellar. He lit dozens in his parlor, bathing the room in a defiant golden glare. He poured spiced wine and watched the village drown in the dark ocean below. They had come begging earlier, pleading for stubs and wicks. He had turned them all away. Let them learn the price of poor planning. The wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the thick glass. Then, beneath the roar, came a frail, desperate scratching at his heavy oak door. Annoyed, Caleb unbolted the iron locks and pulled the door open a crack. The biting cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. Standing on his snow-swept porch was a child, a boy no older than 7, wrapped in a threadbare blanket stiff with ice. His lips were a terrifying shade of blue, trembling violently. The boy looked up at the warm, golden light spilling from the foyer, his hollow eyes desperate. With a frostbitten hand, he held out a dull copper coin.
"Sir, please help me. My mother is seriously ill,"
the boy whispered, barely audible over the gale.
"I am..."
"Go away," Caleb snapped, his voice hard as the frozen earth, cutting the child off before the sentence could land. "This is a business, not a hospital or a charity." He shoved the heavy oak door shut. The iron latch fell with a definitive hollow clank, leaving the frail silhouette entirely abandoned in the raging white void.
Caleb returned to his velvet chair. He picked up his wine. The fire continued to crackle. The dozens of candles continued to burn. But the room suddenly felt entirely different. The light seemed harsh, glaring, casting monstrous, elongated shadows that danced mockingly on the stone. The silence inside the house was no longer peaceful. It was deafening, pressing heavily against his eardrums. He tried to read. He tried to sleep. But the image of that trembling blue hand holding the worthless copper coin burned behind his eyelids. He tossed and turned all night, wrapped in fine furs, yet shivering uncontrollably. Dawn broke with a brutal, blinding clarity. The storm had finally exhausted itself. The wind was gone, leaving behind a crystalline, silent world, buried beneath a pristine blanket of white. Caleb opened his front door, the frosty air biting his face. He intended to clear his porch.
He did not have to walk far. Less than 100 yards from his doorstep, at the edge of the tree line, was a small, snow-covered mound. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He dropped his shovel. The silence of the morning shattered. He ran, tearing through the knee-deep snow, his fine leather boots slipping and sliding. He fell to his knees beside the mound and frantically brushed the white powder away. It was the boy. He was curled into a tight ball, the thin blanket frozen solid around him. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful but completely devoid of color. He was gone.
In his stiff, tiny fingers, he still clutched the single copper coin. A sound tore from Caleb's throat, a low, agonizing wail of pure horror. He reached out to pick up the child, his hands trembling violently. As he lifted the feather-light body, a piece of crumpled paper, stiff with cold, slipped from the folds of the boy's blanket and fell onto the snow. Caleb picked it up. His eyes darted across the smeared ink, the handwriting startlingly familiar. It was a chaotic, desperate scrawl, written by a hand losing its strength.
My sweet boy, take this coin. Follow the road up the hill to the big stone house. Find your Uncle Caleb. Tell him you are my son. He has a good heart, just like our father. He will give us help.
The paper slipped from Caleb's numb fingers. The boy was his nephew, the child of the younger sister who had run away from the village so many years ago, the sister he had thought he had forgotten. The world around Caleb seemed to tilt and collapse.
The blinding white snow burned his eyes. He collapsed into the drift, clutching the frozen body of his nephew to his chest, and for the first time since he was a child,
Caleb wept. He wept until his throat tasted of blood, his hot tears falling and freezing instantly on the boy's icy pale cheeks. He had spent his entire adult life building a magnificent fortress of wealth to protect himself from his father's poverty, only to become the poorest, most destitute man in the world. He had hoarded all the light, and in doing so, he had doomed his own blood to the dark. "I am sorry," Caleb screamed into the empty, frozen sky, his voice tearing. "I am so sorry." And then, a miracle disguised as a whisper occurred. Beneath the heavy layers of Caleb's wool coat, pressed against his violently heaving chest, the tiny body stirred. It was barely a movement, just the faintest twitch of a stiffened finger, a microscopic shudder of the fragile shoulders. Caleb froze, his breath catching. He pulled back slightly, staring intensely at the boy's face. Slowly, agonizingly, the child's eyelashes fluttered. The blue, cracked lips parted, releasing a microscopic puff of white vapor. The boy's eyes, dull and glassy, opened just a sliver, meeting Caleb's wide, terrified gaze. "Mother," the boy breathed, a sound so fragile it almost broke. "The old cabin, by the ruined mill. Please, so cold." Caleb did not hesitate. The paralyzing grip of grief instantly transmuted into a surge of frantic, desperate adrenaline. He scooped the boy up, holding him tight against his own body heat,
and sprinted back toward the stone house to wrap him in the thickest furs. He then rushed the child down the treacherous, ice-slicked hill to the village infirmary, throwing a heavy pouch of gold onto the doctor's table. "Save him," he commanded, before running back out into the devastating aftermath of the storm. He found his sister in the dilapidated cabin by the ruined mill, unconscious and freezing. Wrapping her in his own heavy wool coat, Caleb carried her through the deep snow, step by agonizing step, fueled entirely by a desperate need to undo the damage his hardened heart had caused. He laid her down beside her son in the brightly lit clinic. For 3 days and 3 nights, Caleb sat on a hard wooden chair, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of their chests, praying to a universe he had long ignored. And slowly, the color returned to their cheeks. They survived. The storm had bruised them, but it had not taken them.
When they were finally well enough to move, Caleb did not send them back to the ruined cabin. He wrapped them in warm blankets, placed them in a horse-drawn sleigh, and brought them up the hill to the grand stone house. He gave them the largest rooms, the softest beds, and a permanent place by his fire. But the transformation did not end with the saving of his family. The near tragedy had utterly shattered the stone walls around Caleb's heart, and the light had finally poured in.
By the end of the week, the massive oak doors of the stone house were thrown wide open and secured. Caleb dragged heavy wooden crates out onto his snow-cleared porch. He didn't speak a word of business. He simply stood in the freezing cold, handing out generous bundles of premium beeswax candles to anyone who walked past. He completely emptied his vast, hoarded cellars. He gave until his grand house was as empty of stock as the village had been. He reignited the old copper vats, but the sweet smell of beeswax was no longer a symbol of cold transaction or hoarded wealth. He walked down into the village and gathered the orphans, the strays, the lonely children who had known the biting, unforgiving cold. He brought them into his warm, echoing hall. He taught them how to gently melt the tallow, how to braid the cotton wicks, how to carefully pour the liquid gold. He asked for no tuition, no indentured servitude, and no repayment.
He only asked that they take the candles they made back to their homes, and that they always keep the fires burning for those who wandered in the dark. If you are listening to this, and you feel that your light is too precious, too scarce to share with a world that often seems ungrateful, remember Caleb. We often hoard our love, our time, our forgiveness, believing that keeping them locked tightly inside will preserve us. We think that by giving, we lose a piece of ourselves. But love, compassion, and kindness defy the laws of mathematics. They do not divide, they multiply. If this story touched a quiet place within you, gently leave a piece of your thoughts below. What is the one light you are afraid to give away? Share it, subscribe, and let us continue to walk together through this beautiful, complex journey of the soul. Peace be with you.